Hey, you are listening to the post-burnout growth podcast with me, Alison, and my lovely friend Avril. And today's show is all about energy. And Avril, I am super curious in your post-burnout growth journey, what would
hmm
you say was your most profound lesson about energy?
Hmm. That's a big question and a really good one. Well, hello, first of all, to all of our listeners, and hello, Ali. I'm so glad you're all joining us for this conversation on energy. Um, I learned what energy was when I was at rock bottom with it. And I'm gonna share an analogy that I learned from a therapist I was working with. Um, and she likened it, to use the analogy of a phone battery. And we often know that, when our phone battery is at a certain level, we've got to plug it in. And when it gets dangerously low, oh my gosh, it's going to take that much longer to power back up. When I was in burnout, what I can share from my own experience of living in my body and mind was that I wasn't even at 0% battery. I was probably operating and high functioning on like reserves of energy and blowing through that as well. So when I finally burned out fully and completely to the point of not being able to walk, talk, or do very much, I cannot even imagine I would have been in like, what we see like sub-zero, just absolutely negative levels, and just about functioning and just about able to do the bare minimum. Um, so yeah, it took that kind of experience for me to learn to appreciate that I need to recognize when my mind, when my body, when a boundary, when my emotions are telling me, hey, this is the point at which we are not going to allow ourselves to dip further. I'm speaking in the collective, I mean about myself. Um, this is the point at which I need to proactively go quickly to rest, to fun, to joy, to community, to my friends, to family, to love, rather than waiting for all of just depleting everything because I have ideas around I should be working this way, I should be performing this way. If I don't deliver these results yesterday, then who am I even in this workplace or this organization? Or these ideas around this is what it, you know, false narratives around what it means to be a high performer. Um, so that was my experience. If I was to offer you that question, what was the experience of learning to recognize your own energy levels, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, I was just listening to you, if I may just touch upon that point that you said about showing up as a high performer and the shoulds
Mm,
around that
mm,
that bring a ton of shame of
yeah,
not measuring up.
yeah,
And I think that's a really big point when we think about burnout in general, um, as a jumping off topic for perhaps another podcast. But I
yeah.
think I think it's noteworthy. Um, in itself how that narrative can very quickly contribute to our energy depletion, like the phone battery analogy that you gave at the beginning, and burn
Mm,
through any battery that we might have in reserve super fast with that real, almost mountain like sense of how do you recover that
mhm,
resourcefulness, that energy, that capacity.
mm.
So I think that narrative really stood out. I just found myself going, "Oh my goodness, yeah, that was me." So little digression as usual. But to answer your question, I think the energy piece for me is, I mean, you've highlighted it without actually saying as well, but is this fact that we take our energy for granted. We assume we'll just have the energy, we'll just have the capacity, we'll just be able to keep going,
Yeah.
and that energy will come. And, if we go to bed and we go to sleep at night, and if we happen to be sleeping okay, then we're going to have the energy for tomorrow. But
Mm,
actually, that's not when you're in real deep burnout, that's not the case. And I think that's the wake up call, um, is realizing that energy that you take for granted, and perhaps also taking for granted what it is to recover and restore the energy, is the big thing that we don't have, in my humble opinion, enough awareness around. Because energy is, by definition, the capacity to do work, whatever that work might be.
mm,
And I don't necessarily mean work as in an office work or a job work, any kind of task, any kind of action, any kind of activity, be that just a conversation with someone.
mm,
We need energy for that work. And I think that's the fact that, when we're surrounded in high pressure, fast-paced environments, or not. Even just like if we think, I'm probably going to slightly digress again, but just as a point here is just being cognizant of we are living in a world where majority of us are always on, and
mm,
the majority of us are always connected. Somebody was likening their son to have an extension on the end of his arm, and of course he was meaning his mobile. He literally can't put the mobile down. Mobile is no longer just for making a telephone call, it's for so many different ways in which we interact with modern life. But even just that interaction and that connectedness requires us to process so many bits of information and decide or do something with those bits of information, that's
mm,
a constant energy drain, whether you've got X, Y, Z, one, two, three other tasks that you must complete on a daily basis. And
mm,
so, unlike a telephone, that back to your analogy at the beginning, that can actually be charged up by one source of energy, electricity, this is the other big learning is that it's not enough for us to have a decent night's sleep to recover. And
mm,
that is the big mistake that we make. And we kind of almost think, oh, I'll catch up in my sleep. Well, you just need to look at Professor Matthew Walker's work on sleep. You cannot catch up on your sleep.
yeah,
Scientifically, you cannot catch up on your sleep. Oh, I'll
no,
sleep when I'm dead. Oh, I'll sleep at the weekend. I'll catch up in my sleep at the weekend. And so, this whole idea of us being the only species that sacrifices our rest and our well being for no apparent gain is probably one of the biggest awakenings about energy that I
mm,
had, that we take it for granted. We don't recognize what it is to have it. We don't recognize what it is to not have it. We don't recognize its value, its purpose, and the capacity that it gives us to meet the demands that modern life, places upon us. Um, Bit of a big answer, but as usual, my
so,
brain shoots off in lots of directions. But yeah, yeah. How does that land for you?
what you said about, sleep and rest there, and immediately I'm thinking, this is one of those things we think, at the end of a long day, I'll have earned my rest. And if I just get these minimum hours of sleep, I will be back up and ready. And for many of us, that's the case, right? You go through your day, it's like Groundhog Day, and then the next day comes and it's kind of, again, a pattern repeat. Um, but there were a few things that really stood out for me in terms of there's no one way to rest. For someone, it might be sleep. For someone, it might be play. For someone else, it might be going to a rave. I don't know.
Mhm.
It might be going, playing sport at the end of the long day, or even starting your day with exercise. Um, there are these ideas that rest is lazy, or that rest is something we have to earn because the default setting, the normal way of being is always switched on. And not only are we to be always switched on producing results in our jobs, in our relationships, in our parenting, in our communities, um, we are to, in addition to that, even we've just, it's like we have to earn some imaginary permission to go that rest is a perfectly healthy way of being. It is part of the producing cycle. It is part of the being cycle. There is no this or that. It isn't we are either producing or we're resting. And so, from an energy awareness and management point of view, it isn't I'm either a high performer at work or I'm some lazy person who's, decided to do nothing and sit on my couch. And that's fine if that's what you want to do also. It is, and this is one of my core beliefs, and it's part of the work I do, is rest isn't at the end of things. Rest is integrated into work. Rest is the work. Um, and so learning as well that, rest is not um passive act. It can be, but there are also active forms of rest. And the other thing, as you were talking there, Ali, was around, it's not about energy. Yes, it is about energy in, energy out, but it's also about the quality of energy. So to your
Mm,
point about, it isn't that I get 8 hours of sleep and the next day I, battery full to 50% or whatever, 60%, and then I can go. What are the different areas of my life from which I get this, the sense of nourishment? Where am I nurturing myself? For those of us who are
mm,
familiar with the mental health first aiders, at least here in the UK, if you've been part of that course or had, any kind of information around it, one of my big learnings through that course as a mental health first aider was around protective factors. And this is something, we share as coaches, but, even as human beings, I've talked about this with friends and family, is what are your protective factors? What are you
mm,
putting back into yourself first? And I'll speak for myself in the first person. So what am I doing for myself first? Where are my forms of, that life-giving energy that when it could be anything. It could be I've enjoyed a slice of delicious cake with my tea today. And that
mhm,
is a sweet ritual that I can just be like, oh, I've just loved this 10 minutes, in my own company. Or it could be that I went to an outing with a friend, or I held my partner's hand, or we had a really good laugh at a movie or something. What are those things that we can start to recognize then when we have been part of these experiences? When we have been fully present in these moments, we recognize that our energy levels, it might be sweet, simple, silly, anything. It brings us to a place of resourcefulness and calm inside.
mm,
So, as you were talking there, I thought about the quality of energy as well.
mm,
And especially when we're looking at things in the context of burnout, my experience was everything started to feel very serious. It was like almost the job of
mm,
self-care became the job.
mm,
Um, and it doesn't have to be that way. So, learning to integrate rest, learning to notice what are those points of, quality or life-giving energy, going to
mm,
that quickly. We don't have to earn the rest at the end of like, sometimes you go through a major project launch and then at the end of it, you've got this big launch or the big after party or whatever. We don't have to look at life and rest in those ways. We can come to it moment by moment and in very conscious and deliberate ways. Um, Ali, in terms of your own work of navigating burnout and coming through to post-burnout growth, what did you find was helpful in the sort of in the day-to-day in terms of managing your energy? Because, when we were talking about this offline, we were saying, there's so much language out there around manage your energy, do this, put your boundaries, da da da. And so many of us have heard all of these things before, but there's less in terms of what does that actually mean, and it will differ person by
mm.
person. But what can you share from your experience or from the work you do with your clients in
Yeah,
terms of day
I,
to
I
day?
think I think probably the most simple thing is, I mean, I'm a big reader and I'm always seeking out how can I improve this? What is there to know about this thing that might be helpful for me? And so I tend to even perhaps in the phases of burnout, I wasn't, but in the post burnout and the growth journey that continues, is I've been a much bigger advocate for myself, which is something you kind of touched upon a little bit about not
Love
waiting
that.
to rest. And there was this sense of self-abandonment or worthiness or diminishing or dismissing your needs when you're in this striving mode, like when you talked about, always producing results, etc.,
Hmm.
which is related to burnout, but it's also, feeds into so many other aspects of our lives and how we see ourselves in relation to life. And we're constantly striving to show up and to provide value and to
Mm.
feel worthy and to feel like we're included and that we're accepted and that we belong. And a lot of the ideas that we have around all of that can really keep us in a bind. And so, whilst I was in some of those places, coming out the other side of that, I stopped self abandoning and I stopped. Um, and this is a lot of mindset work. It's not, oh, I just decided it, but it's like a lot of mindset work, a lot of development to go, actually, back to your point about just taking time out for yourself
Mm.
and not having any other thinking layers or patterns or weightiness creeping in to guilt you or shame you for having that time out. These were some of the shifts, the fundamental shifts that I had that lay the foundations for me to structure my day differently. And to answer your question would be because I know myself better now. I know that my conditions for success are not anything that's rocket science or not anything that is, a new discovery by any means. In fact, athletes know that we work best in work and rest rhythms. And with my anatomy background, neuroscience background, I sort of returned to looking at that and going, wait a minute here. And just kind of going, okay, I know that I need more breaks throughout the day, more spaces throughout the day. I'm going to call it spaces as
Hmm.
opposed to breaks, but spaces that I could transition into and switch gears,
Love
power
that.
down in order to power myself back up. Because if I don't do that, it's back to information overload, it's back to overwhelm, it's back to a busy mind that's taking action in inertia and not
Mm.
really achieving anything because you lose clarity, you lose intentionality because you let your autopilot brain just take over in that striving mode. So I'm now not in any of those modes. And it's very much that work, rest, very much like you would do interval training. You cannot persistently run a race and perform a lap of a race with the same level of performance and speed round the track in the second and the third lap as you did the first or the fourth without taking a break. Excuse me. And so it's that whole thing of coming to value something that you touched upon as well earlier. The quality of my energy is determined by the quality of my recovery, the quality
Mm.
of the spaces in which I recover, and the quality of the activities that I do in those spaces that help me recover faster. So if you even go back to the mobile phone analogy at the start, it's like there's two cables that you can have to charge your phone. There's a standard cable, and that might take an hour or two, maybe three, depending your phone, depending how old it is, depending the battery to recharge. Or you can have a fast charging cable, and that phone charges up in half the time to full
Mm.
battery. And like humans, we do need to learn that process of recovery that works specifically for us. In short bursts, we work best. not in long bursts. And I think being multi-neurodivergent as well, I tend to get hyper fixated, hyper focused. I lose track of time. So I already have to put boundaries in place to punctuate my day. And I literally schedule all my breaks. I schedule when I'm shutting the laptop. I schedule when I'm doing my lunch, when I'm doing my gym, my activity. I schedule when I'm having my afternoon tea. But I don't just schedule the space. I schedule what I'm going to do in the space. And one of the things that I found is actually sketching because then I'm using a different part of my brain because I'm
Yeah.
trying to shift myself out of logical, rational, analytical left brain into more of a sort of right-brained approach that has me unclutter my mind basically so that when I get to the end of that break, some breaks are longer, some breaks are shorter, then I come back to whatever task I was doing with a renewed vigor, a higher quality of energy, and a higher sense of vitality. I'm probably overcooking this a little bit, but that's very much for me what works. I mean, it's not just one thing that I'll do, but I
Mm.
think that the biggest thing for me is just trying to say, let go of the old ideas of how work needs to be done.
Mm.
Especially having come from corporate, you just think that I must be like a machine, I must be productive. Even if you've got your own business, I definitely took the ways of working, you touched upon this earlier, from
Mm.
corporate into my business. And it just that doesn't fit. It didn't fit
Yeah.
then for me. I don't know why I thought it might work for me in my business, but I
Mm.
recognized that after the first year that that was actually debilitating. And that was kind of taking me back down that burnout path as well. Even although what I was doing I was deeply passionate about, it just doesn't work for me. But it also goes against our human design between our ultradian rhythms, our circadian rhythms, you know. And this is the part I guess I'm really passionate about. I'll just stop at this, but is we so often work against our biology. A bit like I said earlier, that we deprive ourselves for sleep for no apparent gain.
Mm.
And that's modern mindsets that arguably are very wonky that we are perpetuating that kind of are jumping off points, as you say, into things like badge of busyness, hustle culture, rah, 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 striving, showing up, being high performance all the time like a machine.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
yeah, those are some of my ramblings. But
Oh, so good.
yeah, the simplest thing I'm trying to say in a very long-winded ways I'm very good at doing is punctuate your day, schedule your spaces, create spaces, cultivate spaces, and use those spaces to fuel yourself and nourish yourself and replenish yourself in whatever way, feels attuned to you. And that's a
Mm.
learning process, right? I didn't just rock up and decide this is what I was going to do. I had to try it out, I had to test it, I had to give it enough
Yeah.
time to go, does it work for me? Doesn't it? What do I need to do differently? But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's the simplest thing on a day-to-day basis. What about you?
The thing that came up for me as you were sharing there was about self-abandonment and minimizing and dismissing. And I want to bring the trauma lens to this for those of our listeners who might find themselves with a backstory and a present story of complex trauma, and or are living for whatever reasons, in their current situations or circumstances where there's a huge sense of familiarity with having their needs minimized. And now we have learned to do it for ourselves. So we just push it down, push it down, push it down. We're at the back of the queue. Our needs don't matter. We've learned that very early in life. We might have picked that up, or we might have learned patterns like we don't get to take up any space. And so we have become masters at self abandonment. We don't, and I want to say this with as much grace and compassion for myself and for anyone listening, is we don't recognize that. We don't think we are self betraying or self abandoning. self-abandoning in any way. We believe that these ways of working, and to be fair, for many of us, the ways of working have almost become a way to find a sense of belonging, to find our ways to safety. Um, to, from my own experience, the being productive, being a high performer, high achiever, all of overachiever, really, were all the ways in which I received recognition. I was deemed as being successful by, family systems, cultural systems, etc. Um, and so it would take a long while before I had to step out of some of those systems to then recognize, does this way of working or efforting or hustling actually work for me? Or am I still in a proving, striving pattern? And does it benefit everyone, the I don't know, this life or situationships around me in when I self-abandon. So I think there'll be some layers here for some of us who are listening. This isn't a very easy way to go. You'll have this idea, you'll set a goal around how to attune to your needs. Some of us might need different forms of, it might need therapy for a while and before it comes to coaching, or it might need a certain type of coach. So having a real think about where we learned these patterns, and if it's working for you, it's working for you. But if it's time to make that change, then what needs to be processed and let go of with some solid compassion, before you can move forward. Um, because as Ali and I have been sharing throughout this conversation, our energy is finite. There is only so much for this day, this hour, this moment. When we talk about showing up for work, showing up for relationships that matter to us, showing up for the impact or legacy we want to create in the world, then what is the level of energy we need to be brimming with, is how I think about
Mm.
it. Um, One of my favorite words, it's part of my vocabulary, but it's kind of like a higher intention from a deeper place in my life, is overflow. And so when I think about energy, I'm thinking more about, what is that life force that needs to be at overflow inside of me when I show up to have this podcast conversation with you, or, to coach a client? Like, where am I coming from? Because if that energy isn't there within me, what am I offering? What am I bringing to the table for myself first and foremost before I can offer it to others?
Mhm.
We've all heard the line around, put your oxygen mask on first. We've heard this so much in the self-development world. And I think it's such a powerful image, because we cannot help others unless we are choosing to be with ourselves. We cannot attune to the needs of others unless we are attuned to our own needs. So I think I just want to offer this as sort of, if you haven't already sort of recognized this as a way to become present with some of that discomfort. For some of us, these are very new things. And you might be in your 20s, 30s, 40s. I was in my late 30s to early 40s when I had to work through some of these things. And so a lot of this becomes the journeying towards post-burnout growth. I think Ali said this, it's not like you wake up one day and go, I'm just going to show up and here are all my needs. And now I'm going to make a plan and, just work through this. Um, this starts to become an embodied way of being, where you learn to choose how to honor your energy, learn to recognize where you're at, and more importantly, learn to do something that might be new and uncomfortable for you. It's a new choice in terms of how you manage, in terms of how you protect, and in terms of how you express your energy. So that's a lot of conversation from us today for this
Mhm.
episode. We hope you've enjoyed listening to us, in this unfiltered and in the moment post burnout growth podcast. Ali and I share personal stories of burnout, recovery, and growth to inspire and comfort those of you who might be on a similar path. Please continue to join us to find connection, insight, and renewed resilience. If what you've heard today resonated with you, if it's encouraged you in any way, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. And if you know anyone who might benefit from listening to these conversations, please do share this with them. So that's all for us from today. It's thank you from Ali and me. Goodbye.